What's up, guys? What's up? What's up? Um, Something special for everybody this week, man. We have some special faces. One here and a couple more will be joining us along the way. That's the name of the game with with this show. You know, having a rotating door cast of characters. So, Andrew, go ahead and take a minute to tell the people all about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Andrew Fouts, aka Ministry Misfit. So I am the director of digital resources for CSRM. I'm also now the associate director of church relations for them. We're an international sports ministry agency, paraministry, not agency. Sorry, I don't know why I keep saying agency. Paraministry that we go around. We our goal is to equip the local church to reach their communities through sports rec and fitness.
That's
I
cool.
also run Ministry Misfits on all streaming platforms. And then I've been a teacher, I've been a pastor, I've been a youth pastor, I've been an outreach pastor. I've done just about everything. Spent all day driving Uber for the NBA All Star game in Cleveland, so if I'm a little, my eyes look bloodshot because I've been driving for the past 6 hours.
Yeah, that whole driving for for that period of time, that's got to take a toll on you, you know.
Yeah, you get used to it after a while.
Right. Um yeah, I mean, I it's so funny to me how unsolicited so many people that I have found within my sphere of people as the more that I go along in this whole ministry thing and all of that, it's a group of people that have a tendency to say, you know, I don't fit in anywhere, I'm a little bit of a misfit, I'm too much for these people, too little for these people, all of that kind of stuff. Speaking of, the man from the comment section finally joining the show. Matt, go ahead and tell everybody about yourself for a minute. Can't hear you. The joys
Now
of
you're
live
muted.
live.
Yeah, speaking of comment sections, I'll go ahead
Hello,
and
how
give
about
him
now?
a. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah, Phantom Power would help.
Yeah.
All right. What's up, Andrew?
How's it going?
What's up, man? Nah.
So yeah, go ahead and tell the people about yourself.
Me? Oh
Yeah.
gosh. Um, you know, um another misfit, to use Andrew's term, I'm uh I'm too squishy for the conservatives, and I'm too hard for those that are squishy, you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a big truth guy, just because that's been the piece that's missing in my context. In my neck of the woods, where I live, where I'm come from, is
Yeah.
very progressive, very soft, and I found myself about 5 years ago, um, when my first wife left after I had a catastrophically toxic marriage, just in a place where I didn't know who I was or what I was doing or where I was going. And God just started pulling heartstrings, and he started pressing buttons in my brain and saying, dude, there's way more than what you think all this is. And so I've just been, so I was diving in. Started with Bible Project and then Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser and all that stuff. And I'm like, dude, we have everything backwards.
Yeah.
So, so it's just been a journey since then. And I do get excited and passionate about truth, and come across pretty hard sometimes because of that. But it's not because I don't love you, but it's because I love the truth more.
It's cool. It's cool to be talking about this with you guys in particular, because there are similar themes to hearing both of your stories, but specifically Matthew, if you've been rocking with any of the shows and all of that, you've seen this dialogue playing out in a lot of the comment section of a lot of the videos, and that's been in DMs as well. And it's funny because I find myself, one of the guys that comes on the show sometimes, his name is Shay. He called me out when we were getting set up for all of this, and I say called me out a little tongue in cheek, because he wasn't meaning it when he first did, but it was a wake up call, because one of my big rallying cries for this was application level. Let's not get let's not get dogmatic and legalistic and all of that kind of stuff. But he stops and he goes, "Well, wait a minute." He goes, "You're dogmatic," and I'm like, "Wait, excuse me." But I find myself exactly where you talk about being, Matt, except for me, that thing is sinner turned saint. You know what I mean? And yes, you get there by way of the truth and of grace and all of those kinds of things. But for me, when I see somebody who's walked the miles, apart from God, all of those kinds of things, and come to be able to be vulnerable enough to put themselves out there, man, I get just as passionate, I get just as fired up, as you well saw on Monday. Folks, that's the joys of actually living the gimmick and getting vulnerable in front of the camera. Sometimes you go live when you shouldn't go live. I'm just saying. I can admit to it.
There have been quite a few in the past, 2 weeks, live streams from multiple different genres and everything within the church, where a day later the tweet comes out, "We probably shouldn't have gone live, but we meant everything we said." So you're not alone here.
Right. Well, I find myself in that same kind of situation. Like, there was so much that was said, just words per volume. There was so much said, but I look back on it, and it's not like I felt like stepping away from it, that I spoke lies or anything like that. It wasn't anything like that. It was just, I became the thing that I fight so hard against. You know what I mean? Railing at people and all of that. And that's just the name of the game. When you are okay with getting vulnerable in front of the red light, then sometimes what comes out is a whole bunch of mud, and you need to sort through that mud in order to find the pearls.
Yes.
Were you going to say something, Matt?
That's why I tend to write and record rather than go live most of the time.
Yes. I have, depending on the topic, depending on the length of the show, but I have a 9 to 15 page script each week that I'm going off of, because I have to write it all down, or I am going to live try and pull every thread and go down every rabbit hole or whatever with no destination. So I write the beginning and I write the end, and then to kind of fill in the middle as it comes to me. So
right.
I know where I'm ending, so I can kind of steer the ship a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like if I was doing what you guys do, or specifically what you do, Matt, that more of the academic side of it all, then I would feel the need to be a little bit more scripted. And when Buddy Walk first started, I was scripted, but that was because of lack of confidence. I'm like, why does anybody want to care about what it is that I have to say? That, and I don't want to look like a giant idiot in front of the microphone.
Well, you still do.
I scripted everything. We're off to a rip-roaring start now.
Well, to that point, though, because I'm kind of in between both of you guys here, because we are,
actually you are. You're right in the middle.
Exactly. We are, in a very, we are dealing heavy theology.
Yeah.
But we are not doing it from an academic standpoint. We are doing it straight from a theology ministry. Here it is. Let's do this kind of standpoint.
Right.
But to what you're talking about, this really is what even the whole topic that we're going at today is this idea of when you started, you felt like you had to be scripted in order for people to take you seriously.
Yeah.
Which is really what the whole thing that we're talking about here as far as friendships within Christianity and the church
Right.
is all about.
Right.
Is it starts out scripted because we're too afraid that people won't take us seriously. Whether it's academic or whether it's baseline just showing up.
Yeah.
You know, and then you got guys like me who have been here the whole time and everybody acts like we're new because they can't believe we've been here the whole time. You know.
So let me set the table real quick as we get into this. So this whole idea was born out of a couple of weeks ago. I was perusing. I try not to make it a regular habit to go into a lot of the Christian Facebook groups that circle
Probably
around.
smart. Probably
yeah.
smart.
Oh, it's a fascinating place. If you ever want to take a fascinating dive into what some groupings of Christians can look like, search around some of the more popular Christian groups on Facebook. It is really a trip. But
I live there, which is why I know how bad it is.
Yeah. I mean, trolls need to live someplace. And that's
Usually
going to be
under
today's
bridges,
episode, guys. Matthew and I just ribbing each other for the next hour.
I was wondering why you finally invited me. At first, I was thinking, like, is this a dig because he's bringing me in as an expert on how to not have any friends? But now I'm realizing you just needed somebody to, like, this is the first time I think I've ever been invited somewhere to be the straight man between two people.
That's the best part is the people that I record with on a regular basis. They know that if we're using sports terminology, I can lay color the whole time. I'm good at that, but I need a straight man to bounce off of, and especially with the three of us, I'm like, yeah, I need somebody that's gonna play this straight. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And welcome to the stream, Mr. Anthony.
What's going on? What's going on?
What's up?
How you doing, gentlemen?
Doing well. I was just getting ready to set the table. But this particular audience is new to you. So why don't you as well go ahead and take a second to introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Anthony Wilson, as you see there on the screen. I'm a pastor, podcaster, author, and just a dude that loves Jesus and loves hanging out with people who love God and love their neighbor. That's about it.
Cool. So like I was saying before, you know, this whole idea was born out of me perusing the Facebook groups, and I kept running into similar posts, right? Why can't I find any Christian friends? I wish I could have some Christian friends, and some in different variants of that sentiment. And that got me to thinking about my own personal experience. You know, so many of us, and I'm finding the further that I get in this walk, the more, you know, even lifers that resonate with what it is that I'm about to say. You know, you end up with non-Christian friends, right? And then you get saved, and, well, wait a minute, I can't rock with them anymore because they're not Christian, but where I can't make I can't seem to figure out establishing a relationship with Christians. And the thing that keeps going on in my head is we're called to be the loving bunch, right? And I say that tongue in cheek, you know, I say it a little bit sarcastic. I don't mean to throw jabs or anything, but what confounds me is the fact that a group of people that we are literally, like, Hebrews 10 literally calls us into this posture and things like that, but we can't seem to get out of our own way in order to actually have these kinds of relationships, because it either seems to be surface level, bone dry, starving to death, Or you go out for coffee with somebody and 30 seconds later you're hearing my entire life story and I'm just dumping it all over the place, which is not inherently like telling your story isn't the bad thing, but like maybe establish some rapport, maybe a little bit of a relationship, maybe even a little bit of small talk if you're into that kind of thing. And then maybe go into your story sort of thing. So I throw all of that out there to say, setting the table, one of you guys go ahead and pick up the ball and run with it.
Well, I'll start with saying that, one of the things that has always baffled me, at least from, even just the pastoral ministry side of things, is that dynamic between the non-Christian friends and the Christian friends, and how we think that we have to have this divide,
right?
Especially from a pastoral standpoint, because the one part of the requirements for an elder that we see in 1 Timothy 3 has nothing to do with what Christians think of you. It has everything to do with what the non-Christians think of you,
Right?
but we don't talk about that part. Because we don't want to care if we look like the non-Christians like us, then we assume, well, then we're too worldly. And, right. We don't have to get too deep into it, but, this really is a divide into what we see within our evangelism practices within the church is really where we start boiling down to why we have this divide between this Celtic style evangelism, this Roman style evangelism of either we go out into the community and we become part of the community. And because we're a part of the community now has the light of Jesus in it. Or we have to build up our fortress and we bring everybody in. They have to become a Christian first. And really, I think the place that we can start with, as far as even where a lot of us struggle, is the fact that we all grew up generation-wise. I'm assuming we're all at least close to the same age based off of the way we're looking here. Generational.
I'm way older than you guys.
Well, yeah. Okay. We'll go with that. We all grew up in a culture that said Roman-style evangelism is the only way to go.
Right. And we all know it's broken.
And that's the big thing, is that the four of us are sitting here saying it's broken. We need to be lights in our community.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a group. There are these groups on Facebook, like we talked about, that are still all fortified up in their Roman fortresses, saying people have to become like us before we can let them be a part of us. There's this entire group outside the fortress that are wanting to just have relationship with us. They don't even care if we're Christians or not. They just like the fact that we like the same music, we watch the same movies. We listen to the same podcasts, whatever it is. But because of the fact that we grew up in this fortress, the world thinks that we're unapproachable. And so there's the rest of us that are stuck in the middle outside the fortress saying, you don't have to be a part of this fortress to be a part of me. Right. And you don't have to be a part of this fortress to experience the biggest part of me, which is my relationship with Christ that I eventually want you to see and share. But that's not the reason that I'm approaching you right now. I'm approaching you because you need somebody to approach you right now. Yeah, that really, I think, is where it starts at a baseline level, is that we have been trained to think that Christianity and the world can't mix so much that we think that we have to compartmentalize all of our friendships.
Right.
Rather than actually allowing us to experience a real world, what it actually means to be in the world but not of the world, to transform all of that kind of stuff. Salt and light, whatever Christian cliche verse we want to throw in there.
And it's not like this is a 90s problem. It's not like this is a like a bygone generation problem, because you're talking out of the four of us. I'm venturing to say that I'm the wettest behind the ears when it comes to time served as a Christian, and still, like a couple of years ago, I'm still hearing from people that, like, no, you have to be to be of the same kind of standing as all of your friends and all of that kind of stuff, which low key ends up leading to some really toxic mindsets towards people. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think
Go
the
ahead.
greatest evangelism that I've ever done was just hanging out and around people. I tell a story all the time about a young man who, attends a men's group. He doesn't even attend my church. He
Mhm.
just comes to men's group. That's all he comes to. But he was in high school. I was working at the high school, and it took 4 years to lead this young man to Christ. 4 years. Not 4 days, not 4 hours, not 4 weeks. 4 years of just being there, walking with him, and we'd have conversations, and then we talk about other stuff. I was a football coach, so we talk about football. We talk about girls. We talk about his home life. And then every now and then he would ask me something about God. And then we would talk about a bunch of other stuff and all this other stuff. And we would, we laugh and joke, music, whatever. And then he would ask me something about God. 4 years. And now that young man is truly walking with God. He's seeking after God, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, but it took 4 years though. Most people, they quit after 2 weeks. Like, well, I didn't close the deal. I didn't get to pray the prayer of salvation with them and close the deal. Because it's not a sales pitch. We're not used car salesmen, right? We're not trying to close deals. We're trying to walk with people, and sometimes that means walking with them for a long time. As long as they're willing to walk with you, you walk with them, and at some point they're going to encounter Christ by you actually being light and salt, and like you said, all those things that we're supposed to be.
Salt, not salty.
Yeah.
Right.
The average.
So then what's your, I just got to ask, what's your excuse then, Matt?
I suck.
What you're talking about there, the average that, at least within the sports ministry world, is where we talk about the most. Because this seems to be, the sports ministry world is one area where we can actually talk about these things realistically without having the awkwardness of normal church talk, it seems like.
Yeah.
But within the sports ministry world, we always talk with churches when we're doing this evangelistic disciple making method for them. Typically, it's a 4 to 7 year process.
Okay.
To go from just I'm joining this league because I want to play this sport, to now they're coming into our sanctuaries, and eventually to the point joining a Bible study, baptism, all those different things.
Yeah.
But we don't like to invest that long. And that's, I think, bottom line for a lot of this stuff, both from the non-Christian side of things, as far as can we be friends with non-Christians, and the side of it of Christians becoming friends with other Christians. Both of these, I think we've got it. It all boils down to a systemic issue within the, especially American church, maybe Western church, because Canada has the same issues. We don't like to invest.
Canada's a country.
We don't like to invest. We don't like to take risks, and we don't like the idea. And we're fear driven more than we are anything else, which is what you see a lot of the time in those comment sections and in those groups. Is much more of everything is fear driven over faith driven.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something, Matthew?
I'm just figuring out where to start.
Okay. So you guys brought up something that I think is so vital to talk about when you're talking about this kind of thing, and it's how we even approach people to begin with. I'm in a unique situation where I had a whole preamble before coming to terms with the fact that I never actually had a relationship with God. I did all of the bit part. I knew the songs and the rules and the regulations and the yada yada. I knew it all. But, and so I had exposure to this guy. He was my pastor at the time. and we would just like go out for meals and go out for, I had no idea this word discipleship at that point in my life. That was not something that I knew in the Christian context. I had no idea what was actually happening. I just knew that we were walking through life together, more like friends than like a pastor member of the church sort of relationship. And so we're going through this and we're talking about like we can start to discuss our relationship in terms of decades rather than this is a couple of months here or a couple of weeks here. And sure, there was a lot of nonsense and circumstance and all of that kind of stuff surrounding the situation, but all this time I'm hearing from him words like kingdom, words like that's where those words became common vernacular for me. And part of why now standing here, the only way that God makes sense to me is by terms of that one-on-one unique relationship and all of those kinds of things. But we've missed the boat on, discipleship has become classes. It's become, 6-week courses and learn how to be a better discipler in 7 days and all of that kind of stuff. Trust me, I know I'm part of the marketing side. I get it. It's real easy to slap a number on something and suddenly it can go out to the masses. But the reality is that it seems like to me, and the more that I look into this, the more the Bible backs me. I find that the Bible backs me on this one is these authentic relationships that go on to flourish and become and create disciples that can go out and make more disciples, people that can go out and live this thing out, people that go on to talk about, oh man, I had this deep, rich relationship with this person and can tell these stories. It's not all about, oh, we were at Bible camp this time, we were at, church this time. It was, no, we went out for a cup of coffee. No, we were at practice. We were, you know what I mean? And it seems like the in order to get there, you've got to be willing to do life with people on a very practical kind of level that goes beyond just Sunday morning or those kinds of things, like 15 minutes before service, that kind of thing.
Right.
Take a quick second to shout out Brandon. He's another one of the hosts here. Discipleship has been reduced to an optional program, not part of the core identity of Christianity. Absolutely.
That's big.
Oh boy.
Well, and that even going back to what you were just saying there, though, it's, we feel like we have to separate out the dogmas, the doctrines, the theology from the relationships, everything else. If the theology is not already part of the system, the discipleship system, it doesn't matter how much dogma, doctrine you throw in. And that relationship, as far as the spiritual side of that relationship, isn't going to last anyway. We got to start the theology process with our people that are doing the discipling, and then allow that to develop within the new believers without forcing it down their throats and making them feel like this is, the whole idea of the core identity of Christianity is this, rather than the core idea of Christianity is you are now a part of this bigger fellowship. And so we have all of these different relationships we get to have together because of the fact that Christ did this for us. And once you understand that, then you can start getting into what it actually means that Christ did this for us. We talk about within CSRM, within Misfits, we've got this 3-tier paradigm for how we do everything. We start with Christocentric theological truths. And so we are always heavy on the theology, but we're heavy on the theology because the theology helps us understand who Christ is, not because it makes us a better person.
Right.
And then once we understand who Christ is, then we start going through, okay, what does the Bible actually tell us about this? And then once we understand that, then we can get into doing this is what we do type mentality of stuff.
Well, you are who you're with. So if you're with Jesus and you know who he really was and is, because he is alive, by the way, then, just like, if you have a best friend that you have coffee with like twice a week or whatever. So I used to have this friend, Nick, and so he was from the East Coast, and we hung out so much, people thought that I was from the East Coast. Because I turned into a copy, and at least if you're someone who is open and vulnerable to that kind of relationship, we do that. We are sponges to those that we do life with. We're influenced. So yes, absolutely. Christocentric. So first, who the heck is this Jesus guy? Like the real one, the one in the Bible, not the one that's on TV. And and then, you walk with Jesus. Hopefully, eventually you're going to look at least a little bit like Jesus. As far as Christians and non-Christian friends, I think a lot of it just has to do with weak baby faith. We're being told that we need to protect ourselves. We don't want to be influenced by those people, so we don't reach out and make those relationships, because we're not robust enough in what we think and feel about our faith to encounter what's out there and not get all discombobulated by it.
Yeah, it's the fear motive.
Yep.
For doing everything, which makes no sense if, again, we are Christocentric in our theology. We understand that Christ overcame all this. Why are we so fearful that having friends that don't go to church is going to completely corrupt our children?
Because we forget, we forget the sinner that we were, 5 years ago. Or
yeah, I agree. I agree.
With or 5 minutes ago for some of us, or right now, this second in this chair,
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that is a huge reason why people are struggling. And I just taught a 4-hour spiritual warfare class this morning.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I talked about in spiritual warfare is that, Ephesians 2, 1-3, and he says that Christ has made us alive together with him, who once walked according to the prince and the power of this air, the spirit that works in the sons of disobedience, whom we all walked according to the lust of our flesh, the lust of our mind and our flesh, and we were children of wrath just as they were. And I said, here's why we're not reaching out to people, because we're running from their sin like we've never seen it before. We once did that.
Look in the mirror, buddy.
we once did that same stuff. And I'm like, how did we forget that he saved us and delivered us from the power of sin in this world? And now we should have a heart and a desire to go and reach other people. And how are we going to do it? Well, we got to do it through relationship. And as my man, the ministry Misfits, I don't know your real name. This idea
that is his real name.
Okay.
It's a much nicer name than most people on the internet refer to me as. So.
This idea of being Christocentric is really, if I want to boil it down to, everyday language, is that I know who Christ is for myself. And
right.
So when you're around me, you're going to meet him because that's who I'm around. That's who I spend time with. And so I'm in my word. So the word is going to come out of me. Mm-hmm. I'm in, prayer and quiet time with the Lord. So that's going to come out of me.
Right.
My focus is to make disciples of all nations. So that's just going to happen when I'm trying to do something to check a box, I'm like, oh, I got to evangelize. It's going to come out crappy. It's going to come out like some sales pitch. But if you realize that Jesus just spent time with people who weren't in the Pharisees, cool club, and he caught hell for it, right?
I'm not sure their club was cool, but
but they were supposed to be. They were the cool guys. I was, and I'm just going to share this, and I'm gonna be quiet for a little bit, just a little bit. I did this study on the keys to the kingdom, and I'm gonna give y'all the cliff notes. I'm not gonna give you the full thing, but the conclusion I came to is that when I studied and figured out what the word keys actually meant, the word keys, when Jesus says, "And I will give you the keys to the kingdom," and whatever you bind on earth, you'll be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth, be loosed in heaven. He was telling Peter that I'm gonna give you the ability and the opportunity to obtain this knowledge of the kingdom. Mm-hmm. Now, this interpretation is not, I really haven't heard anybody break it down this way. But when I saw that the Pharisees were getting their butts chewed because they had the knowledge and wouldn't come into the kingdom, and then the people who were coming in, they were hindering them from coming in, I understood what Jesus was saying. He said, my guys are going to open the doors of the kingdom wide open for everyone who wants to come in and learn this knowledge. They're going to get to have it. Now, if you don't want it, you don't have to take it, but the doors of the kingdom are going to be open and you guys are going to go do it. And that's what they did. Mm-hmm. That's what they did. They slung the kingdom doors wide open and they went and preached to anybody they could. Yep. And that's why Peter preached one sermon and 3,000 people legitimately right.
And that really even transitions into the other side of this as to why Christians have a hard time making friends with other Christians. We've got this idea of the fact that, heaven's been revealed. We've got the keys. We now understand all this stuff. And instead of it being an awe-inspiring thing of, wow, we actually have an opportunity to learn this stuff and experience what little glimpses of it God's giving us here.
Yeah.
Instead, we start using it as ammunition to say, right. I know more than you do.
Okay.
And because I know more than you do, you need to drop down and learn from me instead of just, hey, let's go shoot hoops. Let's go do this. Let's jump on COD, whatever. And if we talk theology, we talk theology. But ultimately, we know that both of us were at one point here, and now both of us are here because of Christ and not because of ourselves.
Right. Why you got to attack me like that, man?
I do what I can.
Some days,
and that's it's even beyond just getting to the point of, well, I know more than you. Well, I've got it right. Right. You've got it wrong. If I'm right, that means that you've got to be wrong, and that means that if
I listen to have it right, and the people that you listen to don't have it right.
Don't have it right.
Right. Exactly.
And then we get into tribes, we get into sectarianism, and then we're not any different than what's going on out there.
Right. And then we weaponize the Bible, we weaponize theology, and we turn it into bombs that we can drop on people to attack other people instead of doing what Jesus said. I want you to swing the doors of the kingdom wide open and start inviting people in. I like the parable that he taught, about the folks that rejected him. Like, hey, I just got a new camel I got to clean up, and I just got married and all this kind of stuff. And he said, you know what? Just go to the highways and the byways and grab anybody who wants to come. Because these people think that they are entitled to the kingdom, but they don't understand. The kingdom is suffering violence, and the violent are taking it by force. There's death being had because of the way people are trying to get into the kingdom through their self-righteousness. Well, I'm going to let people in that you think don't belong, and I'm going to move them to the head of the table while you watch me do it.
I'm going to blow your mind. You ready for this? It's almost like if you want God, you can have him.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And it's so fascinating that when you allow that to be the thing that's first, like we talked about, that Christocentric approach, that understanding, having that, as the Bible calls it, firm foundation, the fascinating relationships and situations and circumstances that pop up. I look at just this grouping alone and how these connections popped up out of situations that they weren't of people trying to make connections with other people. They weren't born out of something that we created. Right. We were brought together by this same common bond that humans can't manufacture. Mm-hmm. They can't replicate. And when we try, we end up with nothing more than these self-help, how to fix the problem inside of 2 weeks sort of courses.
That cost $29.99. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. So over this past summer,
therapeutic moralistic theism.
Say again?
Therapeutic moralistic theism.
Wow.
Exactly. I went through this deep dive and I wanted to know.
Deism even. There's no personal anything. He's just out there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
So I wanted to know. Okay, so this word, and you'll appreciate this, Matthew. This word started going around the circles, right? Deconstruction, the boogeyman, started making the rounds, and I want to know, what is the boogeyman? Why are people freaking out about this? And I started hearing about the progressive church, and I understand that by the time that I'm hearing about this, it's not new news, you know what I mean? But like, I knew what I was doing, and I was doing what I was doing, and I wasn't necessarily open at that point in time to listening to a lot of the pop culture Christian stuff, so I did not know that there was this growing sentiment to try and thwart the evils of the progressive church. And I wanted to know what is this whole thing about? And I'm listening to people on both sides, progressives and, as they've been come to know, historical Christians. What are their thoughts on this whole thing? And I'm finding that the major backlash that I'm hearing from the Christian community, the authentic Christian community, is this is what happens when you open yourself up to other people, to other ideals, to other things like that. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold the phone. Before I became a Christian, I was into this whole, I was a transhumanist. I was into the spiritual stuff. Like I was into some things. And so I'm already well aware of these different practices, and I'm seeing these different practices adopted by Christianity and kind of taken into this amorphous blob of, we don't want to turn anybody away, so we just adopt everybody's practices and all of that kind of stuff. This one side of the pendulum swing. On the other side of the pendulum swing, you have people that are just so cut off and cold to anything, to any new experience, any new person, Christian or non-Christian. And so I'm watching as people around me are like cannibalizing themselves over this whole thing and shutting down borders and this and that, and between that and COVID and all these reasons of I found myself because of the whole COVID thing, because I got sick and tired of other people's nonsense when it was all about political this and mass that and all this kind of stuff.
How do you live?
I completely shut down borders. Like I didn't want to hear nothing from nobody. And so I realized, wait a minute, this is really, really easy to justify creating your echo chamber and saying that if you think differently than me, then you're wrong. But why go?
Oh, we lost him, I think.
Yeah.
The extra.
There we go.
Oh boy.
He's just spitting too much fire. The internet couldn't handle it.
Right. Just couldn't.
Yeah.
handle it.
Right. Okay. Can you
ready
guys hear me
for-
now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You ready for a history lesson here? Because we
Yeah.
we literally just went through all of this the last episode that we released last week.
It was a good episode, by the way.
I found. Well, thank you. I didn't realize that I actually made this term because I was positive I heard it from somebody else. But I know for a fact that the term may be my own, but the concept is not. Is what I call Cold War theology. Because what we see throughout history is this: when you go all the way back to the quote unquote founding of America that everybody claims is there. You've got this idea with John Winthrop and the Puritans of the shining city on a hill. And then out of them, you've got these other things that break off. You've got the Baptist church that breaks off, which is all about separation of church and state. You have the Methodist movement that rises up. That's all about great awakening, personal enlightenment. Fast forward into, post World War I. And now all of a sudden, America has this newfound opportunity and everything else. But in that newfound opportunity, it's right at the end of the muscular Christianity movement. It's right at the beginning of, the roaring 20s. And now all of a sudden, you have the rise of fundamentalism that comes up because we can't let this new shining city on a hill be corrupted by alcohol and the dancing and the smoking.
Right.
And then Darwinism starts entering the idea. And so now we have the Scopes monkey trial. And then you have the Great Depression hit. And when the Great Depression hits, everybody now is like, you either have the people saying, oh no, this is God's judgment on us for going this route. Or it's okay, God is testing us route. Mm-hmm. World War II hits, America is the big victor and the big hero. And as we go into the Cold War, now all of a sudden, in order for the America to stay relevant within world power, we have this the dynamics between communism and democracy and capitalism and socialism. And bigger than all of it is atheism versus Christianity. Cultural Christianity.
Right.
And so now, in order for our churches to keep our relevance that we had during the war, we have to become political. And so in order for us to beat back the godless communists, capitalism is now a part of our doctrine. Democracy is now part of our doctrine. Sexual revolution comes out, and now we have another enemy that we can attack. Right. The civil rights movement comes out, and unfortunately we see the church attack, not embrace. We have all of these different things come out, and then even post-Cold War, with the rise of Islam, we see the exact same thing. It's no longer communism that's the enemy. Now we have to beat back the godless Muslims the same way that we did during the Crusades. And then come 2008 with Obama, now all of a sudden, now we can attack communism again is the idea. And so that's why now anybody that disagrees with mainline conservative Christianity is now not labeled a heretic, they're labeled a Marxist.
Wow.
Because we are literally in the same cycle that we were with McCarthy in the 50s and 60s and 70s. It has nothing to do with actual theology. It has everything to do with the political ideology that the church found necessary to maintain power. That's why our churches are built as capitalist businesses that rely on tithes rather than hospitals for souls or whatever cliche you want to use for it.
Right.
And so you've got this deconstruction movement happening. It's not necessarily a deconstruction even of your faith. It's actually sifting out the politics from the real Christocentric biblical theology. But we can't look at it that way, because if we do, then the people in charge lose our power again.
Well, that's half of it. I mean, this is where we would disagree a little bit, Andrew. That's half. Like, that's the good deconstruction. That is you, or that is I, but there are those who do it that know so little of what Christocentric,
Right.
real theological Christianity is, that they just throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're, for 2 weeks, they're deconstructed. And then, you know what? I'm not a Christian anymore. So,
the reconstruction side of it is what doesn't get talked about.
yes.
And
But
that
can't happen in a vacuum. You have
Right.
to be part of a community for that, which is what we're talking about today. We really suck at.
But I think both of you kind of have the same point from different aspects of it, because even this whole, the political parts and all that kind of stuff, so many people today don't know the Bible,
right.
that they actually don't know that they're not walking away from Christianity. They're walking away from this Frankenstein monster that has been created to, resemble Christian faith. Because at the end of the day, if they really, so when I'm hearing deconstruction,
politics in a Jesus suit.
Yeah, and so when I hear people talk about why they left Christianity, and I've sat through, some hours of just listening, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna suck it up and I'm gonna listen and see what they're really saying, because I want to reach people. I'm the guy who's doing discipleship at the coffee shop that, is sitting with people every week that never come to my church, but they come and they sit down with me and they ask me questions and they talk to me about stuff. And maybe one day, they'll come to, but for now, this is what we're going to do. And what I hear is when they started having their doubts about what they were seeing in the church, what they were hearing from the pulpits, they went to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
They went to YouTube and Facebook. They went to Google and Wikipedia, and they started getting.
We don't know how reliable that is.
Come on now. Anybody, I can go on there and just put some stuff in. But, and that's what they did. And I think somebody said it, I don't know who it was, but they didn't go to their community and sit down with anybody who they had a relationship with. This whole deconstruction process was by themselves, right? But then you have those individuals that went to a pastor and asked him some questions that he could not answer.
Right, and I was about to go there, but you went there. So when that's the scenario, there's two streams. So one, you go to your pastor, your elder, whoever, and they don't know any more than you do. They're as clueless as you are. So the other side is you go to your pastor and your elder, and they're like, "Well, don't you believe this?"
Right.
And there's no room.
It says what it says, right?
And there's no room for doubt. There's no room for questioning. There's no room for working out your faith, which is in there, by the way, that we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But so both these streams cause this harm, and they cause this deconstruction because, one, you realize that no one around you knows any more than you do, so it's all fake. Or
that's what they say.
Or there's no relationship where you're allowed to question your faith. You have no one to come alongside you and say, you know what, that's a really good question. Guess what? Christians have been asking the same question for 2,000 years. Let me teach you about this guy Wesley. Let me teach you about this guy Calvin. Let me teach you about this guy Luther. Whatever. And suddenly you realize you're not the first person to ask these questions.
Right.
And this is where the misfit title is one that God gave me, unfortunately for me. Because, this is one of the things when we talk deconstruction, reconstruction, the need for community. all of that is 99.99999% 100, accurate. When I had to go through my deconstruction period in college, it was I had no community to do it with, because the community that I was in was all, these two different dynamics we've got. It's either all 100% academically trained or 100% not trained, just self-taught.
Yeah.
And what I was getting presented to me in college was just the academics of this with no faith and no theology tied in.
Right.
And because of the fact that I was on an athletic team, and for some reason it was like unheard of to be on the athletic team and in the ministry department at the same time. I had friends on the baseball team. I had friends within the ministry department. But those worlds don't mix. And so, I spent most of my time, and I was also on crutches for a lot of it, and I was in somewhat isolation due to epilepsy and everything else. I had to do the work of wrestling through this stuff by myself, which I would never recommend anybody doing. But for me, that's partly because I now have to do that with other people.
Right.
Because we're in this dynamic. We either have everybody, even on this call, we've got two guys that are not traditionally theologically trained. We have two guys on this call that are traditionally theologically trained. But the thing that separates us out and why we actually are able to have these conversations is because we recognize that everybody's going to the internet, and so that's where we put our stuff.
Right.
Because we've got to have both.
Right.
And if we don't have both, we end up in these dynamics and these cliques forming and everything else, rather than having a unified body again.
Right.
And even this is the fear stuff again. This is part of why we unfortunately see a problem with there not being enough good theological information on the internet for people to find, is because the church was so afraid of the internet for so long.
Right.
Right.
But the internet is now a place where community is happening. More so, even unfortunately, real community is happening almost more online than it is in person, because in person we have to not wear the mask for COVID, but we have to wear the good Christian masks all the time. And so we can't be real with each other.
What's that look like?
Right. That was one of the things that,
I have like two friends.
Yeah. Well, and legitimately that's part of why within pastoral ministry, you have so much isolation and burnout within pastors and their families, is because the pastors can't be real with people, because if they're real, then they may lose their jobs.
Right.
Yeah. That's part of why, Brandon and I within Misfits, we know we have a much bigger group of people that listen and agree with us, but they cannot publicly say it, because if they do, their jobs are on the line. That's the world that we have created due to all of these different dynamics and the fact that nobody was willing to address them within the church that actually could address them. And so now it's up to the four, people like the four of us to try to address them. But this is why it's hard for us to be able to have, have Christian friends. Because we're here wanting to just have real relationship with people, regardless of if they, regardless of all this other stuff. But what has been coming out of our pulpits for the past 60, 70 years is that
we're not
this
allowed
other
that
stuff is what makes our relationships.
Yeah. And I'm basically straight up just not allowed that in my context.
Right.
Because, and it is somewhat the way I am, and I get it. If I was my pastor, elder, whatever, I'd probably make me stay away from people too. But that's basically.
I'm surprised Joe is as quiet as he is with all of this right now.
That's basic. I mean, that's basically the context I've been in. They're like, you can be here, you can do your podcast on the side, whatever, outside our building. But there's no place for what I want to do which is bringing, a depth of faith to the community that I'm part of, because it's divisive. So,
right.
And that word
So,
is a big one.
It's
Divisive, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so now I'm a voice on the internet.
Now you said, I was quiet. Now here we go.
Here we go.
It's so interesting to me. It's so interesting to me, Matthew, how we've to similar points of view from you coming from this side and me coming from this side, similar paths, just two different directions, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And in my context, where I grew up and where I ended up back at after traveling around and all that kind of stuff, is a very legalistically heavy area. Catholic, old school Baptist, those kinds of things. And I grew up in the churches where it was very much fire insurance. It was very much the whole concept was that this is your get out of jail free card. This is you turn or you burn sort of idea. And it was there's zero heart context in it. There's zero relationship in it. It's all just the rhetoric, all just you've got
I love you and don't want you to go to hell.
Exactly. So to me, it's like, when I first got saved, right? I was a serial entrepreneur. I was all of these things. I had no biblical training. I had no any of this stuff. And somebody approached me and said, okay, you can have all of the entrepreneurial stuff, right? You can have the money, you can have the success, you can have the fame and the fortune, and you can also have Jesus. I'm like, sign me up. I'm hooked like a mark, dude. I'm literally the target audience for the prosperity gospel. And I fell for it just like a mark. And so the thing that got me out of it was one of my friends. I mentioned him before, the dude who discipled me before I even knew what discipleship was.
Yeah.
Came to me and said, okay, so you believe in all of this stuff, right? Then what about the people that walked with Jesus? Why did so many of them die alone, broke, all of those kinds of things? And it was that one single question that destroyed the entire paradigm of the prosperity gospel for me, and then left me at this point of, okay, then what now? Right? I survived. This illness. Now I've got this relationship, and it's not this. So what is it? I can't be slogging through this life to get to the good stuff afterwards. Then that's just a sick joke. You know what I mean? Right. So what next? And that was my very quick turnaround into almost like a deconstruction sort of situation. Yeah. And the only thing that got me through that was that community and things like that. So yeah, absolutely. There is this melding of worlds that has to take place where we are able to get past ourselves to say, you know what? We all need to get trained in what in the wide world of sports this thing has to say. We need to know what we believe and why we believe it.
Amen.
But because out of a posture of this is how we can then come alongside people and really understand how to love them and really understand how to open up and have community, because like we talked about at the start of this thing, there's so many examples of different people who were discipled, life on life stuff. Life gets dirty, life gets complicated, humans are dirty, humans are complicated. That it's out of those moments, though, that time where you hear the stories of these rich relationships, these miraculous encounters, all of those kinds of things. And I feel like at least in the Western church, we can't get that far along the road because that requires something of us. That requires us to drop the ego, for us to drop the Sunday best, all of that kind of stuff, and to be able to just meet people at a heart level. But that requires sacrifice, not just money. We think about sacrifices in terms of money, or in terms of material goods or things like that. No, I'm talking about sacrifice of the heart to invest in a person, because that requires something of you to invest in another person authentically, not as a project, but as a relationship.
And this goes back to what we started with. Of it all really boils down to the evangelism model that we've been taught as the only way to do it. Right. Because this idea that it's all about get out of hell or get to heaven,
right,
as the two options. One of the questions that I ask people, just because you guys at least know how much I love to mess with people's heads, is to ask a Christian, especially if you ask a pastor, because then it gets really fun. If we were wrong, if what actually happens is that accepting Christ as Lord means that you go to hell, or it just means that you do not go to heaven, would you still have made the same decision to follow after Christ? Because what that ends up showing is what our motive actually is.
Right.
Is our motive just we're here for the reward at the end? Or is it we want to have this investment relationship with the creator of the universe,
right?
Because he's the creator of the universe, not because he's going to save me from my sins, but just because he's the God that created everything and walked in the garden and made us hide immediately after hearing his footsteps. Once we start, and this is the Christocentric theology stuff of, if Christ is really at the center of all of this, it doesn't matter where we end up at the end, because the whole point of this is that we are here to glorify and worship Christ, and we want others to experience relationship with their creator again.
Right.
But that won't preach, because if we preach that, now we're into the sacrifice. We're into the take up your cross and follow me. I have been amazed at how many theological seminary professors and pastors I have seen over the past 6 or 8 months actually make the statement that sacrifice is not a biblical mandate.
Wow.
Because they even will say Jesus does not submit himself to death. Because if we have a sacrificial savior, then that makes our savior look weak. And if our savior is weak, then that means we're even weaker than our savior is. Rather than looking at it as the fact that the only way death could actually do anything to him is that he had to give permission,
right,
for death to touch him. And then even when he gives permission for death to touch him, death can only do it for 3 days.
Yeah.
That's the opposite of weak. It's the whole thing we see in Chronicles of Narnia.
Surprise!
The whole idea of the deep magic and everything like that. If the witch actually understood what that deep magic was, the sacrifice of a willing sacrifice of somebody with that much authority and power, you can't match that with anything else. And this, even when you talk to the boogeyman of deconstruction, the circles that I'm in, the boogeyman is not listed as deconstruction. The boogeyman is CRT.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But even with that, we are giving way too much power to all these other stuff.
Well, and then they connect all of it.
Right. And then everything's connected.
CRT is Marxism, and then the deconstruction is from
which
the
is why I'm labeled.
I'm
constantly labeled on the internet as an apostate Marxist. Even though I don't hold any Marxist views, I'm labeled as an apostate Marxist. But part of it is because of the fact that
nothing wrong with my prostate. You ain't my doctor.
Sacrifice, and a sacrifice that goes beyond just physical wealth and physical this and physical that, but a sacrifice of the fact that the relationship with the Creator is so much greater than anything else on this planet. And if I can have this relationship, why would I not want other people to have the same relationship with him? Go for it. Yeah.
Here's the kicker. You know, I've been a pastor going on 14 years, and I feel like for me, and this is going to sound really crazy, I'm always deconstructing.
Right.
I find myself filtering out stuff that, like, where did I get that from? Why did I? And I go back and I read again. I'm like, how did I come up with that? Well, I didn't. I just listened to other people.
Some guy said it somewhere.
Right. And I just kept repeating it as if it was true. And then when I finally looked at the scripture and broke it down, learned how to break it down for myself, learned how to look at the Greek and the Hebrew, and just learned how to look at the context, right? Instead of there are so many verses that I know that I had to go back and find out what the conversation was, that it blew my mind that I go back and I look at the verse. I'm like, I didn't even know that that's what they were talking about. That can't mean that, you know? And so I find myself always deconstructing. Right. One of my guys, he said, I feel like he's been at our church for 3 years. He says, I feel like we do more unlearning than we do learning. And I said, yes, you do, because I'm going to challenge you to go back and look at it again. Because if you've been in the Christian context for any amount of time, there's some stuff that you got to go back and look at it again. What happens is our deconstruction boogeyman is that these people go and look at it and they just fall into a place of hopelessness because what they heard, they wanted to believe that this was it and that there was nothing else. When you say, okay, that's wrong, they think, and I think somebody said it, they throw the baby out with the bathwater. They say, okay, so I'm gonna get rid of all of it. I was ministering to a Jehovah's Witness one time. And when I actually, and I hate to say it this way, demolished his argument, he didn't know what to do. He said, well, if Jehovah's Witness is not true, then I don't believe in anything. And I said, well, why not believe? Why not go back to the Bible that you've been studying and meet the real God of the Bible? Why not meet the real Jesus? Because he wants to know you. He wants you to know him. He wants to have a relationship with you. And hell was never the driving message for salvation. It was Jesus. I remember the man in Acts chapter 16, the jailer. He's getting ready to take his life. Paul didn't say, don't do that because you'll go to hell. He didn't. That's not what he said. He said, what do I do? He said, believe on the Lord Jesus. That's all he said. He said, oh, don't take your life because you'll go to hell because you don't know Jesus. He just said, believe on the Lord Jesus. Why can't we trust that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation? Why can't we trust that in putting our faith in Jesus, that he will take us to where we need to go? We don't have to enhance it with these other things.
And what you just identified there is really, I think, what at the heart of it is what scares most of the pastors that are calling deconstruction out, and even the ones that are calling CRT out and calling multi-ethnic ministry out and all these other things.
Hey, I've come around on that just in the last year, so I get it, man.
That's because you started listening to my show. When we start talking about all these things and start breaking it down, what really is at the heart of this is much more people are starting to recognize that their identity is in the theology, not in the God that the theology is showing us. Because if our identity is built into the idea of our identity is what Christ has made me, then when some of these different things start coming out and people start trying to have these conversations, whether or not you change your view or not, it's not going to change your faith at all because your faith isn't in that stuff. It's in the Christ that stuff shows you.
Right.
Yeah.
And that really is at the heart of a lot of these issues is where our identity is at. I got to jump off, but enjoyed it. Let me know when you want me back. If you want me back. We'll see.
Sounds good, man.
You said.
Can you guys hear me? I go.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think. Before Andrew jumped in, I had a thought or five, and what? Well, part of it is human nature. There's no way it can be that simple. Like that can't be the good news. That's too easy.
Right.
Yeah.
Or it can't be. It has to be something more than. It has to be something more than It can't, or rather, it can't be something what I've learned my entire life, right? That's the other part of the human nature of it all. If you ask people, why do you believe in this? Why do you?
I've been doing thing A for
process?
X number of years.
Yeah, exactly. Or my pastor has told me this. My pastor has said that. My grandmother taught me this. Those kinds of things. And I don't ever. That's part of why one of the what's like litany of shows at this point that we do is just geared towards highlighting scripture. That short, because the rest of these shows we get on here and we talk and we give our 2 cents. We talk about and preach and all of these kinds of things, but I've absolutely come to the point of understanding that depending on what context you grew up in, bears a lot in what kinds of falsehoods you're susceptible to. For me, it was success, it was money, it was stuff like that, because that was the context that Jesus. Context of, I don't like people that wave a rule book in front of my face. So that got translated into, I'm going to do whatever in the world I please to do. And then on top of that, the idol of success and the idol of money and all of these kinds of things that was the area for me that was the Achilles heel. Now I find myself at this stage of, to keep it within the context of, like I said, the 2 major groups that dominate the area in which I live is Baptist and Catholic. Well, I'm too Baptist. I'm too Baptist for the Catholics. You know what I mean? I can't tell you how many times I have been called Catholic before because of the way that I approach this whole thing and the way that this makes sense to me. But like you said, Ant, we got to be okay with the idea that we are filtering nonsense and garbage on the regular, because you take 2 of the 3 of us, right? We have our forms. We're not in front of a pulpit. Yeah, I preach, and I've been asked to preach at different places and things like that. Sure. But public speaking and being the shepherd of a church are 2 entirely different things.
Right. Absolutely.
And you see the way that we have our platforms and the influences that are shown through the way that we do these things. That is, we are still stepping forward, and you hope that the people that are stepping forward, now we've got these digital street corners and all of these kinds of things, that you hope that the people that step forward and do that have sound doctrine, sound theology, sound all of those kinds of things. But dude, my guys, the gloves are off. All bets are off, because everybody that wants a voice gets a voice. Everybody that has a microphone gets to have a show. And so now we live in a time where there's nothing but questions, and you still have this pocket of Christians that are like, no. If you ask Christians, or if you ask questions, then that means you have doubt. And if you have doubt, then that means you don't have a firm salvation and all of those kinds of things. But we should always be asking questions. If we aren't asking questions, then that means we're stagnating. That means that there's no
how do you learn more
behind it. Exactly.
How do you learn more?
Right. Right. You know, when I'm teaching, sometimes I'll pause in the middle of my teaching and I'll look at people and like, so nobody has a question about this? Everybody's a theologian here, right? Everybody knows this. And somebody will say, well, I was going to ask this. I said, please ask the question, because another reason why, of the multiplicity of reasons we have deconstruction, is because people feel like they can't ask their question.
Yes.
So they walk away with this thing gnawing at them that they never get an answer to. And then some weirdo on the internet says something and they say, oh, there it is, you know, because they are wired to, and somebody said this, my pastor said, so-and-so said.
Yeah.
And I tell my congregation, I say, please don't go nowhere and say, I said. Say we studied it together, and as we were studying it, you learned from the study XYZ. Yeah, because you're not going to catch me just dictating and not saying, all right, you asked your questions. Like I said, I had a 4-hour class today. And I stopped in the middle of this elaborate teaching because I'm like, why aren't there people asking questions? And I stopped and I said, let me pause for a minute. I said, who has a question? And there was about a, minute pause. And I said, I know somebody's got a question. And somebody asked the question.
Look, I barely get this. Someone's
right.
got a question.
That's what I said. I said, it took me an entire year of studying just to be able to present this to you. There's no way that you guys know this. And I'm not saying that I'm smarter than you or anything like that. I'm just saying I've been working on this for a long time. And as I was going through it, I was rocked with what I was finding in the scriptures and unpacking and uncovering. And it was a wonderful journey, but it was a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't know all these things until I dove into it. So if you guys know it and I only explained it for 10 minutes, I must be the greatest speaker of all time. Or nobody's asking any questions. And I know I'm not the greatest speaker of all time. So you got to have questions. And so once one person asked a question, the floodgates open, and we spent time asking questions, asking and answering questions. I said, this is the way it's supposed to be. And a lot of times I say that, especially when I'm in a small group environment. If I walk in because I'm a pastor, people think I'm supposed to preach in a small group situation. I tell them, I am not here to preach. I'm here to have a conversation with the group. As a matter of fact, you might not hear me talk a whole lot because I already have a platform where nobody's going to stop me when I talk.
And part of that's just.
But to speak, good.
A part of that's just our model, because what, synagogue, like how the Jews would do it, it would be in the middle.
Answer, yes.
Yeah. You would read whatever. I mean, it's the Christian term. I don't know what the Jews called it, but you would read the lectionary for the day, whatever the section was, and then the
Torah selection is the way they would say it.
Yeah. You would talk about it. You would literally open the floor, and there would just be dialogue.
Yeah, it's called a havarim. Havarim, and they would go and they would just talk back and forth. Jesus was in one in Luke chapter 2. Said he was asking and answering questions. But go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't want
that. That was it. I'm just saying that's that's the model, and really that was the model the first 3 centuries till Rome kind of took over the church, and the Christians weren't persecuted anymore, and they were able to build buildings and do all that stuff, and kind of de-Jewish the way they were doing things.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we've hit this point in time where those of us that are in the front of the room, and this goes double, triple so if the word pastor is associated with you, that your 2 cents is taken in a much higher regard. And it's this culture of a school approach to the Sunday morning service, where it's one person up there talking 30 to 40 and but the problem is that when you go too far down that road, you hit this point of, you have this person that is the most person in the room, and that if they say it, then it has to be taken at their word and all of that kind of stuff. And there's no room for asking the question, because it's a lot of generations of question. Then that was on. Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Yeah, you'll probably want to repeat most of that.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Okay.
Not for me, I don't care,
we have
but
this approach.
the audience might.
Remind me why I even invited you on here in the first place.
I basically told you not to.
Yeah, right. I'm like, you know what? I want to live life dangerously tonight. Let me put a live mic in Matthew's hand for a minute and see what happens. So, we have this approach where it's academic to learning the scriptures and things like that. But the reality is that with humans, I know for me, one of the many, many litany of reasons why, with Edgar stepping away from Buddy Walk, why I've been focused so much on having guest hosts and continuing to have people around me and all of those kinds of things, there's a litany of reasons. You hear all of these horror stories of people that get, destroy lives, destroy themselves, go, completely, totally out of it. One of the common threads that you find is that it's one person trying to walk this thing alone and trying to do this thing alone, and no source of accountability to be had anywhere or anything like that. The other point of it is that I spend so much of my week in front of this thing, I don't want to ever run into the trap of having this become about me. This is not about me. I am not the star of this show. Jesus is the star of this show. And if you have a room full of people that are all looking at you like you're the rock star in the room, I would wager to bet that it is hard to keep yourself honest and say, I'm not the rock star of the room. And it becomes very easy to not be vulnerable. Like Andrew was saying before he jumped, that you have all of these ministry professionals that can't admit to having these certain types of questions, asking these certain types of things, having these certain types of opinions and all of that kind of stuff. Otherwise, the job is on the line, their position is on the line.
Right.
And it's bred to not... To be in this position of not being able to be vulnerable and say, hey, guess what? Maybe I don't know every single thing that there is to know. Maybe it's that I struggle with doubt too, or something along those lines. And then next thing you know, there's no vulnerability there, but it's that same thing, that's that same rallying cry that sometimes I express in the wrong way, like everybody on this call knows I'm capable of doing. After this week, that we are called to a position of vulnerability, and that vulnerability comes from the same kind of posture. To circle it back, we've been talking about all of this stuff of theology and our positions within the church and our posture and all of this kind of stuff, but all of these things that we're talking about really play a major role in dictating our posture towards other people too. And if we never have seen vulnerability on display, then how is it that we can expect people to be vulnerable with one another? You know what I mean? Like, we have situations that pop up, influence different people in different ways. and you have people that cling to, I can't be vulnerable because of this reason, or people that have gone through the paces and it brings them to the place of understanding how to be vulnerable, but all of a sudden they're called all outside their name because the thing that they're displaying is like a foreign language to a lot of people because it's not commonly displayed.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. And as a pastor, I think it's more difficult. I'll tell my congregation, in a heartbeat, I'm like, you know what? The angels didn't drop me off here on Sunday morning. I put my pants on one leg at a time. I've got to go through the same things that everybody else goes through. And so when you're vulnerable as a pastor, people will say, yes, I want that. But at the same time, it's difficult for them because they really want you to be a hero. They want you to be Superman. And you're trying to tell them that you're Clark Kent, but they want you to be Superman. You're like, but I'm Clark Kent. Yeah, I understand that. And that's great. And I love that you're Clark Kent, but please be Superman. Right. and you want to be vulnerable, but it's like, for me, I have to like give people doses of vulnerability. Like, let me put a little sample out there and see how bad, how much this rocks them. If they can take that, then I can be a little bit more vulnerable. I can say, you know what? I had a lustful thought. Let's see who leaves the church.
Right. Are you all still here?
Right. I heard some cuss words in my mind. Did anybody leave? It's like, but people say they want authenticity, they want vulnerability, but at the same time, they don't know how to handle it from people in positions, quote unquote positions. Because I view pastors and leaders as servants. You are servants. I am not to be served. I'm here to serve. And so you're making me out to be this big shot deal. And I'm trying to clean toilets. I'm scrubbing floors. I'm trying to stay in that place of humility because I don't know which one of you guys said it earlier, but there is that temptation to be the guy, right? To fall into what they're asking you to be. And that could be your downfall. Paul said, I discipline myself so that I don't preach to others and myself be disqualified.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting because for me, I got saved in the nosebleeds of a mega church, and I had heard a million times before in so many different contexts, in so many different situations, at Sunday school, at church, at this church, at non-denominational, at Baptist, at so on and so forth. I had heard the gospel words. Right. I had heard it displayed and all of those kinds of things. And man, I really thought, because I really wanted it all to be true. It's that part of that death phobia thing in the back of my mind, because if this is true, then that means there's something outside of on the other side of the coffin. You know what I mean? So I wanted real bad for all of this to be true. And in the position that I was in, I just wanted somebody to say something that made me feel good. Little did I know that thing that was going to make me feel good was, for the first time, hearing somebody, I don't need to hear for the 87th time, somebody else standing up there saying they got the beat on this whole thing. That they've got this whole thing figured out and all of that kind of stuff. It took a pastor stepping forward and saying, you know what? I want to be honest with you guys. Now, mind you, we're talking about somebody who's slightly older than me. Like not very old for somebody who would be considered a tenured pastor. And, comes out and says, I still struggle with doubt sometimes. I still doubt my faith sometimes. And I'm like, whoa, did everybody else hear that? Like, hello, is that thing on? Like, is it what?
Right.
You mean to tell me the dude who gets paid to be here is gonna admit to? Because I was foolish. It's a human being. I prick him, he bleeds. I understand that it's a human being, but I also understand that humans that get paid to be a thing and say a thing and do a thing become very, very dedicated to playing that role and will not commonly step forward in front of the people that they are there to, speak to and say, hey, this whole thing that we're all here to do and we're all here to celebrate, I doubt this thing sometimes. That to me opened my eyes, softened my heart, and put me in a position that for the first time to actually hear the gospel message. It's that vulnerability, and I fundamentally believe that had a major impact on me, and why I take the position that I do so much in the ministry that I do, of this need for raw and authentic and dirty and just being a human being. That just because we're Christians doesn't mean that we have this all figured out. And I think if we can do that and display that to one another too, that says, hey, look, I'm still a person that has a whole lot of, thoughts, fears, desires, things that I enjoy to do, stuff like that, that we can be Christians, or I can be a Christian and talk to a non-Christian and talk about something other than God. And that's okay. You know what I mean? I have a lot of passions and desires that I can relate with people on, and being able to discuss that, or being able to say, hey, look, I have a struggle, and this is the real tip. This is real. This is reality. And being able to do that and then not have that person immediately turn around and say, whoa, oh, that just got real? No, I don't want that. You know what I mean? That goes a long way in establishing rapport and relationship. And you know what? It's part of why I don't like the phrase winning souls for Jesus. You know what I mean? I'm just not a big fan of that particular turn of phrase. I'm not going to sit here and go on a 20-minute diatribe about how it's sinful and all of that kind of stuff. But I think it sets a bad precedent, because if you just have a conversation with somebody, you may have to have a million conversations with that person before they are in a position to ask you one single question about God.
Right. Yep. I worked with a guy for 2.5 years before, and everyone I work with, almost from my first day, knows where I stand as far as my faith and stuff. I don't hide it, but it took, 2.5 years of just hanging out at work, talking in an empty store when it was slow before, comparing our music and, whatever else, because we were both musicians, and till finally, he brought up the God thing. And actually, he's one of the reasons I started my podcast, is he was asking me all this stuff at work. And I'm like, dude, I don't have time to deconstruct the Trinity for you at work. Like,
right.
So I'm like, I'm going to record some stuff at home. I'm going to share it with you on the internet. And I don't know, people started finding it. I started getting comments, and here we are. So
yeah,
but it started as a thing for one guy that I had a relationship with, that I didn't have time at work to answer all these questions.
Right.
And then COVID hit, and we couldn't go out for coffee and stuff anymore, which what we had been doing. So that's what the internet's for.
Yeah. I I've had the pleasure, of walking with, a lot of people that when they met me, they were either skeptical or they were burnt out and didn't want anything to do with church or Christianity. Mm-hmm. And by just being around them, just loving on them and just being there to answer questions when they had questions, never pushing it, but always ready. That's what I used to tell people. And one of the older guys in our congregation is a fisherman. He says, man, you would make an amazing fisherman, because you have the patience to have that fish on the line and not yank them in, but just sit and wait. And I told him, I said, I've never actually fished. I've never gone fishing. But when it comes down to people, I know how to just be there with people. And I taught that to my children without actually making it a program. And this is where my point, this is where I'm going with this, is that there are things that are caught rather than taught. That when someone spends enough time around you, seeing you do something authentically, not as a program, not as a systematic process, but they just see you do life, that seems to rub off. And I think somebody said that at the very beginning of this conversation.
Yep.
That it just seems to rub off. I watched my son for 5.5 years in college do crew and FCA, and I watched him have friends that smoke weed, that do this and do that. But when they wanted to talk about theological things, they went to him and sat down with him, and they would talk with him for hours. Sometimes he'd call me, hey, Dad, me and so-and-so are talking about this. What are your thoughts on that? And I got to talk with them,
Nice.
And then we would go down there, a couple of times a year, and I get to meet with them and sit with them and be a part of that. And I was like, wow, my son's bringing me into, his mission field, and I get to hang out with him and see him interact with people. And I saw that he had learned how to just be there. A lot of Christians, somebody drops an F-bomb and they're ready to tiptoe out of there. We both could sit there and, okay, you're upset, or you just talk like that. That is not a hurdle for me, know. And somebody said, the pastor's in there with them cussing, and yeah, but if this young man gets a hold of Jesus, there's going to be nothing like this. That's why I have a whole bunch of guys that are between the ages of 22 and about 26 at my church. And it's really like a specialized group of about 22 to 26. They're just out of college. Or, and because I'm like, come on in. We're just going to sit. We're going to talk. If you slip up and cuss, I don't, that's doesn't, because at the end of the day, you'll work out that. I did. I got past that, that's not a big deal, but your heart and getting to know Jesus, that's my prerogative. And I will sit there for weeks, months, years until you get it, because none of that time compares to eternity, right? If it took me 10 years, it still doesn't compare to eternity. And that's my mindset. And I wish that other believers would have that they'd be willing to stick it out with that neighbor, but they're too busy talking about how bad they are. And I saw them they were cheating on their wife and all this kind of stuff. And I get it. We want to be the moral police, right? We're the moral cops. No, we're not the moral cops. We are Christians. And so we're supposed to be putting ourselves in a position, because that person's going to need some hope, because if they're living like that, they're crashing. Their life is crumbling. And it may look like they enjoy what they're doing, but they're really falling apart. And there's got to be somebody there that can preach the gospel to them and show them the gospel when that time comes.
I think it's so important that you bring up that word hope, because hope is such an important thing. Like, I used to hear, people say things like, just let your light shine. Just be different.
Right,
and I'm like,
right,
that sounds good on a Sunday morning, but that also sounds like a whole bunch of nonsense to me. Like, but until I realized
I ain't got no light.
Right. But until I realized that that thing that's different about us is the sound of victory blaring from deep down in our spirits.
Yes.
And how do you do that? You have hope. You have hope in something outside of and that's something that, I hear you draw these examples of, being amongst people that aren't perfect and pristine and Sunday best and all of those kinds of things. And unfortunately, we hear that and we're like, oh, wait a minute, the Padres doing that?
Yeah,
What is he
right,
doing?
right,
Like
right.
that. But when we look at who set the bar, right? Who set the example, the
Right.
barometer for what it is that we're supposed to do, how it is that we're supposed to be, not just with other people, but with our friends too. Catch that, because we see on display how Jesus acted with his friends, just like we saw how he acted with the unrepentant. So, like, we see this full picture, and the things that you're describing, the things that are coming up, the things that we're talking about are at the very core of how to have relationship with people, whether or not it's in the context of mission and ministry, or it's in the context of just talking to your friend.
Right.
Being able to display these things and to be able to have honest and real conversation without being like, oh, you mean to tell me that you said a 4-letter word?
Right.
Or you had this thought or whatever like that? Like,
Right.
when we're able to do that, we're able to display, it would seem, this low-key version of hope. Because if I can hear you go out of pocket, if I can hear you start talking about this, that, or the other thing, or express these things that you're struggling with and all of that kind of stuff, and not bat an eyelash, not skip a beat, that means that my hope is strong enough in the thing that I count on, that I'm not swayed and thrown and all of those kinds of things, that I can just keep on going because my foundation is firm enough that I'm not rocked by those things.
Yeah. 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 I agree. I mean, because at the end of the day, if our foundation is rocked by that, what does that say about this Jesus that we believe in?
Right.
Yep.
I mean, if someone can rock you with just a few bad words,
Well, it says you don't really know Jesus that well, is what it says. So,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, that's it. And there's part of that, though, that, you know, I quote a lot.
and I'm not attacking anybody. It's not their fault. They're in we're in contexts where we're just not learning these things.
Yeah.
Right.
And we don't know what we're not learning. We don't even know what's out there.
Yeah.
So I'm not like, I say a lot about, oh, the Christian this, the Christian that, whatever. I know it's not their fault. I'm not blaming anybody for that, except, you know, the people that should be teaching things they're not. But that's a whole different, you know.
Right. But again, to find that same common ground, I can tell you that I find myself in that same kind of trap of Christians this, Christians that, and, you know, sounding like I'm wagging my finger,
Yeah.
you know, and all of that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, like, you are completely right that we're in a situation, by and large, the people that are going to be watching this are in a situation where, you know, people don't know what they don't know. And it's taught that that's okay to just maintain and not to grow and all of those kinds of things, and grow and challenge and poke and prod and all of that.
Here's Jesus. Now go love people. I mean that.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. That statement you just made for a lot of people is scary, because what they're going to want to do is say, but, you know, because if you just say, you know, love God and love your neighbor, or love you, like I heard this one guy say, love God and then go do whatever comes after that. And most people are like, whoa, hold on. But they don't realize if you really love God, there's a whole lot of things that you won't do.
Right.
If that relationship
If
is
you love
genuine.
me, obey my commands.
There you go. You know,
Right.
I think about, you know, my wife. I love my wife. And so there's things that I won't do because of my love for her. And people say, well, you know, you shouldn't have to change yourself to be with somebody. I'm like, wait a minute. Everybody does that. Everybody changes themselves to be with somebody. Because if you're telling me, because you want the other person to change to be with you, so why would you say?
Because we only want it one way. We want everyone to change but us.
And that's it. That's exactly it. And that's the issue. But because when we let people be people, we struggle with that because we want to control how they are people, but we don't want anybody to control how I am being a person, you know?
Right. You can stop talking about me now.
but what if we just love people? You know, I had a guy it's been about three and a half years ago. He was like, you know, kind of done with church. He was in between. He was at a really abusive church where they just were really controlling, and you can't date this person unless the pastor, you know, signed off on it, or weird stuff like that. And it was some really spiritual abusive stuff, right?
Emotional, mental, spiritual abuse.
Yeah,
all of it.
Man, it was really bad. Yeah. And so he met me, and what we did was I took him to a Jersey Mike's, and we had a 99. Now, anybody that doesn't go to Jersey Mike's doesn't know what I'm talking about. But a 99 is a sandwich that's not on the menu. And, you know, you should have saw how impactful eating this sandwich across from this guy was. We went to this sub shop, and he said, you know, what do you get here? I said, well, what I get's not on the menu. You want to try it? He said, well, sure. It's like, give us 2 99s, giant size. And I said, you're going to have to take some of this home. You know, you have to take some because this thing is big.
Challenge accepted.
I'm setting it up, man. And I made sure I gave him my order. You know, it's the Little Vicky's salt and vinegar chips. And they have these sodas. I forget the brand, but they have raspberry, cherry vanilla, root beer, orange cream, and all, you know. And so, you know, ordered the meal. We sat down and we just talked and we ate. And to this day, when he's ministering to somebody, he takes them to Jersey Mike's and he sits down and he gets a 99 with him.
Nice.
Now, because we're a discipleship church. So what I did with him, he's doing with other guys, right? He's repeating that process.
Right. Replication.
Yes, he's doing that because I'm not going to reach your friends. You are. You know, you're the one that's going to reach them. They may never come talk to me, but God's put you in their life. Another guy, he was in a tough situation. He met me at my son's football practice. And it was weird because he said, well, you're going to meet with the pastor, right? You're going to meet with the pastor. You want to set up a meeting and talk with the pastor. And I guess he thought he was going to come to my office and we were going to sit down. And he's going to sit in a little chair across from me. And I'm going to look down at him. And I had him meet me at my son's practice at the football field. Beautiful day. We're out there in the grass. I'm coaching and talking to him, you know, in between. And he told me, and that was 10 years ago. That was 10 years ago that this happened. He's a pastor at our church now. And he told me, he said, you don't understand how impactful that day was. That we just went to your son's practice, talked at the football field. From that day forward, I was sold on this. And that's what's missing. That's what's missing. Is that where are the people that say, you know what, let's just go down the street and just talk. No expectations, no nothing. And let that person develop. To this day, he's now meeting with people. He's working with a guy right now that everybody's written off. And he's like, nah, I feel the Lord is doing something. I'm going to stick it out with this guy. That's what it's supposed to look like. But I think one of you guys said, I don't know who said it, but and I'm a pastor that I don't have a set salary. If the church has it, they give me a salary, but most of the time I'm raising my own support. I'm like a missionary in a pastor's position, right? So I don't, you know, it's not like a guarantee, you know. So I don't have to, you know, play
Worry
the role.
Right. You don't have to play the role. You don't got to worry about losing the paycheck.
Right, because I'm not in it for the paycheck. I'm in it for the gospel's sake. I'm in it for Jesus and him alone. And so, I you know, woe to me if I don't preach the gospel, you know?
Right. That's literally the basis behind what it is that you're doing. And if you can do that, and I just, you know, I think
I can't not share the gospel
stuff.
Right.
That's why I don't have friends. People know that we're going to sit down and within 5 minutes they're going to get Bible something. So it's just it's in here, it comes out.
Right. Yeah. But it doesn't have to come out in a verse, right?
Right.
It just comes out in your conversation. The wisdom of God is going to flow out of you. You may not quote Mark chapter 9 verse this and that, but you're speaking the heart of the word.
Not
and
a
that's, you know.
Yeah. You know,
I have like 2 friends because of it.
It's so, and that's what you're talking about is so the, that secret sauce that I think every person responds to. And as we bring this plane in for a landing, you know, if there's any one takeaway, we've gone all over the map during this conversation.
It's all connected.
But at the,
right,
that's exactly it.
It's all connected.
Every single point that we hit all draws back to this fundamental idea of life on life, of authenticity, of all of those things. And sure, we've talked about this in the context of sharing the gospel and evangelizing and all of those kinds of things. But for so many of us, there's such a tell that if you would approach this way, then that means that you're approaching people this way. That means that the way that you're approaching the everyday person is reflective of this. And so whether or not you are in the pulpit at the front of the church, or if you are just the person in a person's life that your paths have crossed, or you're a part of family and you're, you know, whatever the context of the relationship, if you have that relationship, the way that you establish rapport with that person is being willing to be open and have just, whether or not it's just showing your vulnerable side and saying, you know, oh, I had a lustful thought. I cursed. I had this, this, that, or the other thing. Or if it's just being vulnerable enough to say, you know what? We're just going to have a conversation about football. We're going to have a conversation about something that we both enjoy. And what stems from that is what stems from that. And being able to have real conversations with people about everyday things takes that ball so much further, and will get you to the point of, at some point in time, when the situation pops off, that they feel comfortable enough around you to be able to then quote the Bible or preach or do whatever, you know what I mean, evangelize, for lack of a better phrase. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Relationship for me, I think, is the greatest currency that we have. You know, people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. You know, the time that we spend with
I've
people.
always hated that line, but you know.
But it's true.
I know.
It's so true. There's people that, you know, and I'll probably, this will be better, you know, for you. I'm starting to learn you, Matt, kind of how you are. But in other words, I got to get my pound of flesh. You know, this is how I win their respect, right? Is by being there. You know, I said to this one person one time, I said, you know what? If a person can't respect what I believe, then they'll never accept what I believe.
Right.
And the way that they respect it is because they learn to respect me in the way that I live out this gospel that I
Right.
preach. So they see it in my life and they respect. That's what one of the young men said. You know, he said, "Man, I learned to respect you." You know, and I'm in an area where if I go to the grocery store, somebody's saying, "Hey, pastor," or "Hey, coach," or that's my environment. I was hanging out with a guy who's part of the Navigators.
Okay.
And, Navigators ministry is just all discipleship. You
Yeah.
know, there's no pastors, there's no, everybody is just discipling people, right? And that's why we get along, because I take from them. I'm like, man,
I did an offshoot for a while. I don't remember what it was called, but it had the wheel and all that. It was pretty similar.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They, you know, I love the Navigators. And he said, man, the way you pastor is the way we do Navigators, except for we're not pastors in the pulpit on Sunday, you know, but, you know, being out around people, from working in the high school to just being in the neighborhood now, because I'm, you know, full time at the church, just being around people anywhere I go. We're in the restaurant having something to eat. One of the late, well, she's not a student anymore, she's grown. She comes over, "Hey, coach, how you doing?" And she comps our meal, like, you know, we'll take care of that. And, you know, like, okay, well, God bless. You know, you guys are still open. Are you guys going to go live on Sundays? Because I'm usually here and I can look at it on my phone. And I'm like, this is what it's about. Why is she like that? Because she knows me as a person. And in knowing me as a person, she knows what I represent. And so that is attractive to her, because it's not Mr. or, you know, this important person. They can laugh and joke and, you know, have a good time. And like I said, if they slip and say a cuss word, they know I'm not going to cut my eyes at them or anything like that.
Right.
But they know who I am. And so they respect who I am. Hey, oh, I'm sorry, you know, but I never said anything. I never said anything. That I challenged, you know, a guy one time. I said, what if we took these pastors in these large churches, and there's a strip there's a strip in Colorado. I live in Colorado, and it's called Colfax. And so Colfax is like whatever that main street is that runs through your city, where there's some parts of that street that are horrible, and there's some parts of that street, and so it runs through your whole city. You know, Colfax is that street for us. And I said, if we got some of these mega church pastors or these church pastors with these large congregations to spend at least once or twice a year on Colfax, handing out sandwiches and praying for people and meeting people, it would change the whole dynamic of their congregation. Because most of these pastors are sitting in a leather chair behind a big, nice desk with a huge bookcase behind them, and
books they don't read, by the way.
this pushy situation. And when you walk into their huge office, you just expect God to thunder his voice from that room. And we don't know that. We don't know who they really are. We don't know, but because we had to wait 3 months to get on the schedule, you know?
Yep.
So I could have divorced my wife by now. If 3 months later I get well, we already filed the paperwork. So, you know, I'm gonna cancel my appointment.
Thanks for nothing.
Right. So my thing is, how do we get that back? Because when I look at Acts, I look at a church where, and this is something that you guys were talking about earlier, a church where people actually liked each other. You know?
Well, not only that, we see people not doing ministry alone. I mean, Jesus sent out the 70 or 72, you know, whatever. No, but that was 2 by 2.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus didn't have one disciple; he had 12. And you know, can we for a second, you know, talk about the miracle of a guy in his 30 having 12 close friends?
Right.
Seriously.
Right. Right.
So, to be the heart of this conversation, no, but yeah, no, and then we've got, I mean, and Paul, I mean, he went with Barnabas until they, you know, until they had their argument over Mark.
But I was talking about Paul earlier.
But then he went with with Silas after that.
Silas?
Like
He had
we don't
Timothy,
we
he had
we don't
Titus.
see we don't see this one person going
No.
out. That is a model that is foreign to the scriptures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul, I was showing somebody at the end of Romans, I think it's at the end of 1 Corinthians 2, this roll call of all of these people that Paul said, and my fellow servant this, and my fellow brother this, and my fellow worker this, and fellow, like, wait a minute, Paul,
and you loved me when I was in prison,
right,
and you came and saw me
yeah.
this place, and you
and man, you gave me a coat when I was cold, and I mean,
right.
and it's like, we view Paul as the ultimate lone ranger out there doing ministry, just, saving the world by himself, just a man on a mission, right?
That's not what it says.
But that's not what it says.
No.
Not what it says.
All right, guys. Well, we're rounding out at just over 2 hours, so we're gonna go ahead and wrap this up. But honestly, like, for anybody, yeah, right. For anybody who questions the importance of what it is that we're talking about here and having this connection with people and all of that kind of stuff, like was just said, the Lone Ranger, the single person going out there, gutting it out, going by themselves, going it alone, all of that kind of stuff is not a model that we see displayed in the scriptures. It's just not. We are literally called into the opposite of that very model. And so we need to remember that because of that, you're talking about unique individuals that are all asked to now come together. That's going to mean that every person and every conversation and every situation is going to be unique.
Yeah.
We can't one size fits all this. We just can't. And so if there's anything you take away from this, understand that's approaching people as unique and approaching people in this manner that allows for vulnerability and conversation and passion and all of those kinds of things to be able to be displayed in an authentic kind of way, then you've got actual community, you've got actual relationship and things like that. And like you said, Ant, relationship, that's currency, man. The longer that I get on the longer that I spend on this earth, the more that I realize that these few authentic relationships that I have are so meaningful, and that only continues to grow the older that I get.
Yeah.
So, all right, Ant, you want to go ahead and pray us out?
All right. Well, Father, we just thank you for this awesome time of fellowship. This is a unique style of fellowship, but God, we know that you're in it. We know that you're flowing through it. And I just pray that those that were listening got as much out of it as those of us that were participating in the conversation and facilitating. And I just thank God for this platform, Kingdom on the Road. And it's just an opportunity to meet people where they are on a Saturday night and just be a blessing. And I just pray that something was said, spark something, that it encouraged someone, that it let people know that we're bridge builders, not barrier builders, that we're trying to reach people with the love of Christ, that we want people to know that, hey, you come as you are, but the Lord Jesus, he'll show you who you're really supposed to be. And sometimes we think that the way that we are when we come is it, but he's got a lot more to show us. And so I just pray that as the gospel is preached, that hearts are pricked and opened to receive this seed of the word, and that they bring forth good fruit in their season, and that, God, we would not grow weary in well doing, as we all have our own personal platforms that we're on. But when we come together as fellow workers in Christ. And so, God, I just thank you, praise you, and honor you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right, guys. As always, I want you guys to know two very important things as we depart: that you are prayed for and that you are loved deeply. We will hope you guys have a great week, and we'll catch you next week.